that incline the system toward two dominant parties. So you have experience, Aaron, with the Obama campaign was in 2008 now, but again to some extent in 2012, enormously exhilarating. Attracted lots of young, energetic people with organizational skills. You know, we have a sort of theory about how Jesse Jackson would destroy the rainbow because he wanted to get the $1 million and the plane from the Mondale campaign. Let's leave. That didn't happen this time. What went wrong? Why didn't an organization, a left critical organization, come out of the mobilization in 2008? It never does.
You know, no matter what we say here, no matter how much we read, no matter how deep we get in theory or whatever, politics, actual politics, is the object of our skills, if we have any, I have any anyways, comes down to two things: balance of power and timing. And this is something that you can frame, you can discuss, and this is a very useful discussion we're having here, and we can continue having it, but it's something that people who are actually involved in real politics can do and make a difference. Now, my calculation, if I'm not a political scientist and all of a sudden will not be a politician, from what I see, from what I know, now is not like the Obama case. It's different. I see in the world that all sorts of things have happened. Okay, and the conditions are quite different. Capitalism is different. A lot of things are quite different. And at the same time, you have all these people that they say. I don't think that Obama ever said that he's democratic socialist.
But he did say the whole Bernie Sanders thing came from him. It's you, not me, and the bottom up is under your power.
Yeah, fine, but that's.
He didn't do it though.
Well, he can't.
So it's different. It's quite different. It's quite different. And our friends from the UK, 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks before Corbyn get into power, they didn't know that they had not a chance. They just ran somebody, you know, on the left, because it was the way they described that to us last November in London. It was just the people who were sitting in a room like that, and they said, well, I mean, there are 4 people running. The left should run. Bernie, not Bernie, what's
Jeremy.
Jeremy, it's your turn. And he said, oh my God, I can't do that. What are you talking about again? He gets 60% using, so happened, the system, when the system that the right wing of the party backfired, because they had the way that the leaders were elected through mass sort of voting, it was just to undermine the party. So there was a lot more energy outside the party for the party, and the leftists, you know, represent something.
Well, they all came into the party in order to vote for Corbyn.
Yeah, but they didn't really came into the party.
They just came to vote.
Yeah,
but they paid their dues.
They paid their dues, And when, I don't know, someone asked Corbyn, what are you going to do if all these people become more than voters? He says, I don't know what to do them. Because, as we were saying before, the organization, the organization machinery, the technology of mobilization of that party is obsolete. Cannot, you know, all political parties we have today, with a few exceptions, and for shorter or longer periods of time, they are machines, they are tools, that they belong to a different social division of labor. The development of parties, as we know very well, they coincide and they follow the social division of labor since the 19th century onwards. But now what we have, including the American parties, which are sort of different, and including the European party system, which looks more and more like the old American political system, a party system, they're old and done. And people are looking for different ways of representation.
Well, look, on the one hand, Syriza is, if not defeated,
No, I'm not,
and
yeah.
Syriza is halted. The onward progress of Syriza is temporarily halted
Okay, we
by
like to think that.
by the way in which the Greek economy and polity is entangled in European-wide and worldwide organizations like the European Union and IMF and the central bank and so on. In the United States, we all would expect that were Bernie to win, and let's take that lead, that Bernie would be completely entangled and halted by, not by external entanglements, but by forces firmly within the United States economy and polity.
This is the empire. We should forget this.
So I think it would be interesting to wonder whether there is, I mean, you will say, everybody will say, I will hear endlessly from all the blogs that I receive, that what Bernie should do at that moment is he should organize his supporters into something. Some people will say a third party, for example. But we also know that third parties have an incredibly hard row to hoe in the American electoral system, and in fact, they just about never succeed. So let's go back then to the sort of initial dynamic which gives us courage and hope. Bernie didn't come out of nowhere. Bernie, I think, was in a way the creation of movements in the United States. We've had 4 or 5 years of extraordinary protest movements, beginning maybe in Wisconsin, then the Occupy encampments, which spread to what, 1,500 cities, and these young people, by and large, were incredible communicators. They were geniuses at antics and getting the
In that sense,
attention,
it's very similar to Syriza.
and even the sympathy. The press may have thought that they were idiots to begin with and funky and stuff like that, but they couldn't get over things like their electronic talents in projecting, we are the 99% onto blank walls of huge skyscrapers. So then came Occupy, and then came Fight for 15, also an electoral movement. I mean, that wasn't really a union movement, and it may never become a union movement. They haven't won a single union recognition. But they've won a lot of new minimum wage laws. And then came Black Lives Matter. And then came Bernie. Now, it's true that Bernie, yeah, he's sort of a vain guy. And if somebody had suggested to him, you should run for president, he probably would have said, yeah, I should. But the moment in which he actually threw his hat in the ring was a moment in which there was an enormous amount of energy for opposition, for conflict, because of the movements. And the Bernie campaign probably is good for the movements too, because, you know, the thing that he keeps saying over and over and over again in his speeches is sort of a movement slogan. But what we don't know about is sort of the next stage. Bernie, he's not going to succeed as the head of government, right? We don't think he's going to succeed as the head of government in implementing his program. Well, as either as in his contest for the primary, or I think there's a small chance he could win the general election. Probably not, because there's so many ways of stealing it, if nothing else.
If he wins the Democratic Party's nomination, I think he will win. Clinton, I don't think she will win. Because there is a,
you think
there's a rhetoric, sorry, I mean, you know more, I'm supposed to learn these things, I'm not here, not to tell, but there is a rhetoric both from the left, Sanders, and the right against the establishment. Okay? There was the African-American policeman that let me into the country having a post in Canada as I was coming down. He asked me if I can make money by studying politics, and he says, you make money out of that? And he was very surprised, and then we start talking about politics there, and he says, Clinton is going to win. And then immediately I said, but she's yesterday's news. Oh yeah, she's yesterday's news. Bernie, I don't know. So even if people who have considered into, the fate of, this the way it is, there is a hidden anti-establishment feeling. And it comes from the left and the right. And in this clash, it seems to me that most people are going to go for the left. And then you have to institutionalize that. And third parties, the history of the third parties in the United States, okay, you know more than I do, I know nothing about that. However, don't have to call it a party, call it something else. And make sure that it functions in a different way than these other parties, okay? Because this is what the people say now, especially the young people.
All right, so maybe the question is a slightly different one, Aaron, in the House. Maybe the question is, so movements energize left party. The movements energized Syriza. Movements energized the Sanders electoral insurgency. We usually think that when movements then become part of the electoral process, that all of the conflict and energy is sucked out of them. And it usually is.
Yeah, that's why it shouldn't be like that.
So
that's why
the question is, what can the left in government, or I'm going to frame a question now. What can a left that actually wins government power do to energize the movements that made that victory possible. Because that's not what the left in power ever asks. What the left in power always asks is, how can you shore us up? What can you do to sustain our control of government? What can you do to help us? And what you can mostly do to help us is keep quiet. Stop blocking the roads. Right? That just hurts the left in power. We've got power now. Shush. But maybe that's exactly wrong. Maybe what the left in power should do is think of the ways in which it can use state power to re-energize and sustain the movements to which it owes its power.
With great respect to the movement's autonomy. The problem with Syriza is that Syriza was a follower, a student of the movements, and not an organization that led in a vanguardist or in a patronizing kind of way, just like the other parties. And that distinguishes Syriza. There is a drawback to this. The drawback is when in power, and you need the support of the movements, you don't know how to motivate them and push them, you know, because you're there with them to provide support, to learn from that, to get their ideas and the political capital they provide you. And that, it is a problem. I'm not saying that, but we have to, that's why I'm saying that Hillary's distinction between power as a domination and as a power over, it's one thing, and at the same time trying to find the dialectics of power as a capacity to change the world. And that comes from.
You wanted to talk. Why don't you come over here then?
I just wanted, I thought what you just said, it was very relevant to what's happening in Brazil, about how the left in power forgets about the social movement that put them in power in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem that Aaron said before about the problem of finding a coalition, a governing coalition once you're in power, and that's exactly what the Workers' Party did in the last 13 years. The landless workers, they were marginalized, all the other movements were marginalized, the leftist parties that helped them elect them were marginalized, and we had an impeachment pass in the lower house yesterday to impeach the president. And not only that, not only marginalized them, they made alliances with what was worse in the right, in the conservative forces in Brazil. So I was thinking to what extent the lessons of Syriza can also be a lesson for future leftist parties in other parts of, not only in Europe and in the United States, but also in places like Latin America, where the left now it just took a huge blow, and it looks like reactionary forces are actually very well placed to take power now.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy?
Yeah, the question you posed, Francis, about how can a left party use and revitalize and so forth the movements, which I'll put them, that kind of thing is addressed in Hillary Wainwright's Reclaim the State. Now, she's not addressing any left in power on a national level. They're small examples, but they're very nice examples about how to do this, where instead of just the state apparatus administering, whether it's welfare or whatever, there are movement organizations which were given the resources to do that and let, as they decided, and she talks about participatory budgeting and so forth. These are very exciting, small examples, but it's very disappointing that Syriza didn't do more of that. And I think, I mean, whatever the box they were in, they could have done more. Nevertheless, whatever Syriza's faults, it's totally different from the Democratic Party. Let's keep that clear, okay?
Oh,
You
it
know,
is.
Obama's party, you know, I mean, whatever coalition that you're talking about, I'm not sure. I mean, the major support is from the banks, just as Hillary's major support is from the banks. Now, if Sanders actually got the nomination, even though it's within the Democratic Party, he does not have that kind of support, as neither did Syriza. That gives him more opportunities. Unfortunately, you know, it's still the Democratic Party and we don't have another organization. I think we have to look at the experience, the process, you know, to build various new things. I mean, we're talking about very different kinds of animals.
Not various. One thing that will contain the various things.
Yeah, but don't, that's magic talk, I'm saying.
Oh.
We should build an organization. What kind of, how?
Well, so one thing I would say about that is, I mean, by coalition, I mean the electoral coalition. It's fair to say that Obama, and you know, when we think about majorities, it's fair to say that how politicians cultivate resources is a very important thing and affects how they govern. But we should also, I think, look at the electorate, and electorates, you know, do mean something also. I think in the case of Bernie, if you play this out, what happens is Bernie's raised an impressive amount of money for a primary election through grassroots fundraising. It's not, I assume that Bernie's coalition, by his own articulation of it, is pretty much Obama's coalition electorally. To mobilize that coalition, which means mobilizing many marginalized voters who you do need to knock on their door 3 times to get them to vote. That means that you need a big field program. That means you need tons of staff. We're talking now $1 billion. And so where does Bernie gonna go? I mean, as impressive as his grassroots support is, Bernie has the conundrum of saying, I want to mobilize this coalition of marginalized voters. To do so when party linkages are so weak as they are in the United States brings up a real strategic dilemma, because I don't know how you do that effectively without raising tremendous sums of money that is going to, if not come from Wall Street, you know, I don't know. And when, by the way, you say I'm not going to raise PAC money or super PAC money, that means the unions also can't give you money through those vessels, which is a very important way in which unions participate in politics. So it's a nice thought, and it's been very, as a movement, it's been incredibly impressive, but there are a bunch of dilemmas that come here organizationally when you think about how do you build majoritarian power and create a kind of majority coalition that would be able to govern organization beyond the election aside.
Susan, and is that you, Peter?
Yes.
Susan and then Peter.
Can I come back to Greece and ask a question? Sitting, you know, reading the New York Times, watching TV, whatever, we're very aware of the balance of power internationally. Greece, I mean, Germany, the IMF, the Bundesbank, as Francis has been saying. But what about, you mentioned, you rightly say international and local balance of power. Could you give us give me at least more of a sense of what Syriza has been having to fight with politically in Greece? I mean, you mentioned the bureaucracy and the mistakes they made bringing on people who work for Syriza, but what's happening in this sense in Greece that we don't really hear about?
Very quickly, there is a triangle, deadly triangle between businesses, media, and politicians, and in the elections, who have been completely been organic to the reproduction of a given balance of power, whatever. You know, majority of my colleagues have been on TV saying lies, you know, through these years. You know, Greece has a huge private-public sector. We spend too much. All this baloney, which it's not, didn't, you know, the huge one. Now, because the power of this triangle has been challenged, because Syriza has not been defeated it was faced with a defeat of its strategy last summer, has been defeated. It's far from become Brazil with corruption and all that kind of stuff. They're fighting corruption, they're providing food, shelter, whatever they can under very difficult circumstances to the lower or marginalized social strata, etc., etc. So, and they are very much against any changes. Let me give you an example. There's no way not to change the law of how university professors are hired. Okay, and this has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with fiscal problems, etc. Well, as we call it, the local troika goes to the other troika and says things like that. You know, no, they should not allow to do that. About 8-10 months ago, a very good friend of mine met a couple of government functionaries in Brussels. And they met some of them. They said, what are you doing? You know, I was here having a meeting with this commissioner. What did you tell him? Well, I told them that Syriza is a bunch of terrorists or a bunch of communists. You know, and that kind of thing. These are people that they were paid by the Greek state. 6-8 months after Syriza came into power, bad mouthing completely. You know that things like that. You know, there's not one major TV channel, radio program, or anything like that that will more or less state what is happening. It's amazing. I'm sure that Latin America has the same kind of experience from what I read. You know. So things like that. Let me give you an example. I'll say, the International Political Science Association decided not to be in Istanbul, supposed to be somewhere in Europe. There was a bid or whatever. There were some of my colleagues, they were giving me the same line that we should not form a local organizing committee to participate and transfer the proceedings to Athens, because in July the immigrants are going to be running the city, this is not nice, and the whole thing is not to help the country. So Syriza is not, should not be tolerated even as a compromise, even as a reformist, even as a centrist thing. It has to be out. It's very vindictive. They are very vindictive, and the internal powers, and eventually this is what happens. A bunch of my colleagues, they veto initiatives for not having a chance to consider Athens as a location of the 3,000 people who are going to participate in. So things like that are every day. They are not confronted properly, in my opinion, by the Syriza government. Okay, I'll grant you that. But the other side.
Actually, the impeachment charges by the lower house of Congress seem to have a kind of touch of vindictiveness in them too, because the politicians who passed that measure are all criminals. Everybody knows that.
300 of them officially has something pending with the judiciary. 300 out of 513.
300, what, sorry?
That's the majority.
300 members of the lower house has some sort of some sort of case pending with some level of the judiciary. It might be for
And the charges against Rusev have nothing to do with personal corruption at all.
yes, and I think for the lessons coming from today is that now, after they lost everybody else that they chose to ally for years, they're going back to the social movements. They asked the social movements to go to the street to defend their mandate, to defend their
Yeah, that's too late.
That's what they should have done in the first place.
It's
exactly.
too late.
And also they lost legitimacy because the people organizing the what they call the coup is the people that have been allied to them for the last 8 years. The vice president and the president of the lower house, they were passing legislation in favor of the Workers' Party because they're not victims of what's happening to them. They brought them on themselves.
Peter, you wanted to say
Yes,
something.
I mean, I want to ask Michalis, because from what he said, it seems to me that there are two fundamental commonalities between Syriza and Bernie Sanders that may be problematic. One is that the political changes that both aspire to. Now, Syriza, the party, of course, is, as an organization and its history, is a radical Euro-communist, party. But the political line before the elections of 2015 was against political corruption. There was not an agenda for radical democracy or changing even the Greek constitution. The line was, we will clean up the government. We will collect all the taxes that the other parties could not collect because they are corrupt. They are in bed with the big corporations and the banks and so forth. Bernie Sanders' critique, of course, of American government is exactly the same. There is no critique of the Constitution. There's no critique of the institutions of American government. Mm-hmm. The criticism is that money in electoral politics has corrupted the purity and virtues of American political institutions, and the goal is not to change American politics. The goal is to clean it up. There is no political agenda in terms of changing American political institutions. The goal is to eliminate the influence of big money in elections, and presumably once you do that, things will become wonderful again. So one question I have is, what is the political education being made possible when there is not a critique of the political institutions of Greece or of the United States? It is simply a very old idea. I mean, in both Greece and the United States, we can go back to, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, of course, and well before that, that America is a great country, the Constitution is wonderful. The problem is that you have a corruption. Now, in the case of Trump, it's the Mexicans. In the case of Bernie Sanders and others, it may be the big money. But that